the idea was that we would get members of the African group of negotiators, including the chair of the African group of negotiators, to give us a briefing on the status of the negotiations at this stage of the COP, but also a synthesis of the expectations that Africa realistically expects to get by the end of the COP. Now, unfortunately, we understand that the COP presidency has requested the continuation of consultations on the cover text between the different negotiating groups to try and reduce the distance, the differences between the groups, because there are still some substantive contestations, particularly on issues relating to the global stocktake and the global goal on adaptation. So the chair of the AGN is definitely not going to be able to make it. He is actually advising the ministerial consultations on the finalization of the text, while other members of the group are also in different huddles or meetings on the text. The chair has assigned the chief negotiator from Botswana, Mr. Balisi Hopolang, to join us to give us the briefing, but he is also briefing his minister, and he has informed me that he is going to be joining us as soon as he is available. Meanwhile, I've been authorized to read the statement of the AGN on the negotiations as of yesterday. So I'll do that, and then we'll have the executive director of the Pan-Africa Climate Justice Alliance, our colleague, friend and comrade Mitika Mwenda, to comment on that statement from the Africa Group of Negotiators, if you will allow. So apologies for the change in the program. It's a somewhat long statement, so please bear with me. Firstly, we would like to thank the UAE government and the COP28 president in particular for the excellent arrangements for the conference and leadership they have demonstrated in this conference so far. This is the Africa Group of Negotiators. We reaffirm our support to the process so that we arrive at a meaningful and ambitious outcome at COP28. We wish to share our reflections on the status of the negotiations and indicate our expectations of the outcome of this conference. As you know, COP28 has been dubbed as a crucial moment for global climate action as we take stock of the implementation of the Paris Agreement since 2015. For us, as the Africa Group, we came here focused and determined to ensure that COP28 delivers a fair and balanced global stocktake that catalyzes greater ambition across all elements of climate action, that is, adaptation, loss and damage, mitigation, and means of implementation, centered on equity, a just transition work program aimed at promoting sustainable development, and climate finance, where developed countries make meaningful financial commitments, both in quality and quantity, based on their obligations under the Climate Convention as well as the Paris Agreement. As such, we expect COP28 to result in tangible outcomes which reflect Africa's expectations, aspirations, especially on the need for balanced and enhanced climate adaptation. We expect a robust framework on the global goal on adaptation outcome as the work program comes to a close at this session, and we are disappointed by the lack of progress on this important issue in the first week. Decisions that we must reach at COP28. We are concerned about the lack of progress on various issues of importance to our group, particularly on finance and adaptation. However, With few days remaining, we believe we can still deliver on the following work streams. One, on adaptation. We reiterate that adaptation is a key priority for African continent and a critical component in the implementation of the Paris Agreement. Adaptation is a matter of survival for us in Africa. Amid all the summits and meetings taking place to discuss this issue, what Africans need to see is action to help us adapt to this changing climate. How are we to cope with the persistent droughts, the devastating storms, and rising seas which threaten our very lives and livelihoods? Last month, the UN Environment Programme published its adaptation gap report, which revealed the scale of the problem, a widening gap between the adaptation needs of vulnerable countries and the funding that has been made available so far. The report has revealed that the gap is 50% larger than previously thought, and that adaptation needs are now 10 to 18 times as great as the flaws of international public finance. We wish to agree with the UN Secretary General on the report, who said, and we quote, "Lives and livelihoods are being lost and destroyed, with the vulnerable suffering the most. We are in an adaptation emergency. We must act like it and take steps to close the adaptation gap now." COP28 is mandated to complete the work undertaken for the past 2 years under the global goal on adaptation by launching a robust framework on the GGA. The outcome of the GGA is the most important outcome for Africa at COP28, without which we would consider COP28 a failure. As we have stated before, at the heart of the framework is the development of qualitative and quantitative dimensional and thematic science-based targets that are measurable and time-bound to help us achieve the objective of the goal on adaptation. Further, the means of implementation, including finance, capacity building, and technology transfer, will be a critical component of the GGA framework. We believe that further technical work in unpacking the goal, informed by science, will be necessary upon the adoption of a robust framework here in Dubai. On loss and damage, the delivery of the Sharm el-Sheikh COP27 decision to establish a new fund for loss and damage was a milestone achievement for the multilateral process. We note a historic and positive start to the conference, where the Loss and Damage Fund was operationalized and initial financial commitments made within minutes. As we welcome this good news, we are cautious of similar commitments made in the past, which, from our standpoint, have not been fulfilled. We hope this won't be the case with the Loss and Damage Fund. We are also alive to the fact that loss and damage requires billions, if not trillions of dollars. We therefore call for more resources in order to actualize the intended purpose of the fund, that is addressing loss and damage. We also wish to note the adoption of the decision regarding the operationalization of the Santiago Network on Loss and Damage. We take this opportunity to commend our technical negotiating teams who represented us on the Transitional Committee on Loss and Damage for a job well done. On finance. Finance is critical for the implementation of both the Convention and the Paris Agreement. Africa has and continues to suffer the brunt of the adverse effects of climate change and has not received the required multilateral support to face the climate challenge. African countries require access to scaled-up levels of new and additional and predictable grant and concessional finance for climate action. However, despite the clear provisions of the Paris Agreement that make the level of ambition by developing countries contingent on the support provided by developed countries, we continue to witness a decline in the delivery of public climate finance in real terms. Developed countries have not met the US $100 billion per year mobilization goal by 2020, the goal of doubling adaptation finance by 2019 levels by 2025, is an undertaking on paper only. Various reports demonstrate the enormous climate change needs of developing countries and how present public climate finance flows are not forthcoming, inadequate, and lack quality. On the global stock take, we have now reached the final leg of the consideration of the output phase. It's important that the outcome is practical and one that all parties can effectively implement. In Article 2.1, the Paris Agreement places emphasis on the pursuit of sustainable development and eradication of poverty to make certain that the poorest and most vulnerable are not left behind as we ramp up climate action across all fronts in light of equity and the best available science. The GST outcome must therefore be guided by the principles of the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement, in particular, common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities in light of different national circumstances. The GST must explicitly recognize Africa's developmental constraints and challenges and facilitate the provision of the support and development space for the continent to exploit its natural resources and endowments for achieving sustainable development goals. On the other hand, the just and resilient low-carbon development, if not properly designed, risks widening the developmental gap between Africa and the rest of the world. This is not the sort of outcome we must have here. The GST outcome must enable us to achieve the purpose of the Paris Agreement in the fullest sense. And finally, on the just transition pathways, the African Group welcomes the establishment of the important work program on just transition pathways. Advancing and the implementation and strengthening of the global response to the threat of climate change, however, this should be in the context of equity and center on sustainable development and poverty eradication. We should design a robust and comprehensive work program, including elements, scope, and modalities here in Dubai that recognize the different pathways for achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement. We look forward to engaging constructively with all parties for a successful outcome of COP28. Ladies and gentlemen, that was the statement of the African Group of Negotiators as of yesterday. And so as we said, they are now continuing the consultations with the different parties as well as with the COP presidency. We would like to now request the representative of the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance to give us the reflections of African civil society on the status of the negotiations so far. Dr. Mitika, the floor is yours. Come and speak from me.
Thank you, James. I think we need to really appreciate James and the African Group of Negotiators for that. Let us appreciate them for one reason. I'm asking you, let us appreciate them because I tell you why. So why I'm saying we appreciate them is because that statement reads like our statement. We had a press conference, 2 now press conferences, and articulated our African demands based on our aspirations, particularly informed by the processes which took place and built in Africa towards this COP. So as we conclude this process, we need to reflect and ask ourselves whether in the government, whether in the civil society, whether in the other key sectors, non-state actors across the African continent, we ask ourselves, as we reach now the home stretch of this COP, whether we are going back with what brought us here. And the key issues for us and which are reading one by one in this statement, which we fully identify with, is that it captures the spirit of Africa. More importantly, we are going to highlight ourselves and stand with our government, because they have mentioned that if the issues which have not been raised in the statement are not met in the next 48 hours, then we are going to declare this COP28 a failure. And our failure to us is beckoning. Because right now, as we speak, the text which we have come across, if it is controversial, and it is the issues pertinent to Africa which are deemed controversial or which are deemed contentious. First and foremost is the issue of overall adaptation, even without breaking it into the elements of GGGA and adaptation finance. That is very pertinent to us. You are privy to the information that there has been a lot of deals around this conference. But I want to tell you, to ask you whether you have heard about a major deal on adaptation, which means the key priorities, aspirations, demands, and desires for the African people, African continent, are still swept at the carpet. And then the question then is, are we going back again to lament? As the civil society, we are going to say no. We have still time. The chair, we end our meeting with the chair, and they outlined the issues which James has mentioned. And we told him, this is the time to stand together to be counted. So the issue of adaptation and the global goal for adaptation with measurable targets is an irreducible minimum for us in Africa. So if this is not achieved, because I know now, instead of this being at the negotiation table, they were referred to the president's consultation. And so when that is done, you know the result. And you know our stand on this presidency. Adaptation finance, again, is very critical for us. Right now, the last time I checked, we had only $139 million US on adaptation pledge. And so the question is that even enough for the transport of some of the delegations we are seeing here? That we leave it, because those are critical issues which we have to ask as Africa. The other issue is the issue of what we are calling the pledges on loss and damage. When we were doing our press conference, we indicated that we are here to celebrate. We welcome the decision and we welcome the pledges. That's very good. But what is required for loss and damage in Africa? And I again agree with the AGN that we require billions for loss and damage in Africa. But up to now, it is even not $1 billion. But I see here in the corridors, that is the biggest milestone we are being said we have achieved. There is nothing we have achieved. Having experienced how these things come in, there is one thing, agreeing or having a fund, and the other thing, ensuring that that fund is capitalized. That's the next level. We have funds which we have. We have adaptation fund. We celebrated it, but it remains a shell. We have the Green Climate Fund. in addition to being made very complex to access, even worse than the World Bank, which we were condemning, because you have to define the climate rationale, which you do not understand what it means to define a climate rationale, complicated terminologies and semantics to ensure that we don't access the money. Even now, we have a problem with it. It still remains a shell to the scale of the money which is required to capitalize it. Industrialized countries will rather deal with their money on bilateral basis rather than putting it there at Green Climate Fund. Is this what we are going to also see with the now loss and damage fund, which we are celebrating? The other concern about loss and damage fund is, yes, we agreed about it, but what is the framework to ensure that those communities at the front line of climate crisis access that money? Ladies and gentlemen, just look at the framework. Is it set for failure? Because a decision is up to COP28, 2028, when we'll have to see the light on this fund. So yes, the money has been put there, but it will take us years to ensure that we get that money. In the meantime, those communities marooned by water, flood waters in the village I come from, are waiting for that money. Will they access it before they die? That is the question I ask the COP here. Because there is one thing in having the money, and there is one thing in accessing it. So this is very fundamental. I will finish by the issue of loss of the just transition. Just transition is very pertinent for us also. But we need the African narrative, the contextual just transition for Africa. What the transition is defined in US, in Europe, is not the just transition we have to Africa. It is, our just transition is sector-wide. It is about agriculture. We are now living survival. But what are we going to transition from? So we really need to understand what it means when we talk about just transition, without with also acknowledging that the transition to low carbon climate resilient future is inevitable. So we need to find a way, a win-win situation. In Africa, we have to acknowledge that we have an advantage on that. The minerals which are driving the just transition in the world, critical minerals, nickel, lithium, rare earths, copper, and those others, all of them are in Africa. Are we going really to benefit out of that? How are we going to add value into that? All these issues, and are we going, if we are not going to ask for money, which is not coming, then let us have value in our minerals so that they can finance just transition and issues which are critical for Africa. So Africa is a continent which is going to drive the next transition to low carbon climate resilient future. But we need that to be acknowledged. We are not beggars. Africa, what we are demanding is ours. It is our right. And those are imperatives of climate justice. Thank you very much. I know there are colleagues here, James, who are here. And they are going also, I can see there are representatives of farmers here. We have Steve here. We have also indigenous people. Let us have that. And because this, and thank you very much for having this conversation. This is what we need to be doing. There is no difference between African governments and African civil society when we come to this negotiation, because we are fighting as Africa. This is a complex process, and we need to be heard. Thank you very much.
Mitika, I hope that this is not your metro ticket here. Check. So yeah, thank you very much for those comments, Mitika. I'm informed now that the heads of delegation are in a plenary session. And so the colleague from AGN who was going to join us is accompanying the minister into that meeting. However, I recognize the presence in the audience of Professor Seth Osafo, who is the legal advisor to the AGN. And I would like him to just take a couple of minutes to explain what happens at this stage of the process, just for colleagues to understand how the process is organized. If you will, Professor. So Professor Seth Osafo has been, in fact, the legal secretary of the UNFCCC from its establishment in 1992 and continues to be the legal advisor of the Africa Group of Negotiators. Thank you, sir. Sorry to...
James has trapped me and he's taking me unawares. I actually came to listen to the AGN chair make his presentation. But all the same, let me share briefly a few insights about where we are in the process. I think one major achievement that we have from this COP is that the COP president decided, and out of the blue, it's not happened to before, he decided that the decision on the operationalization of the loss and damage fund was going to take place on the first day. And there was a lot of goodwill. And when he tabled it, it was accepted and adopted. So I can say that if we are not getting anything at all, and definitely we will get some outcome, at least we have the operationalization of the loss and damage fund. The Secretariat is going to be hosted by the United Nations Disaster Risk and Relief Organization. And then we also know that the fund is also going to be hosted by the World Bank as the trustee. And so basically, I think we are on our way. The board for the fund is going to be established. In fact, invitations have been requested from parties for nominations. So we are hoping that it won't be long for the fund to start operating. And I think that's good news. We've also had pledges so far about 700 million that has been pledged towards it. So I think it's, in a way, some positive steps have been taken. On the issues themselves, at least one disappointing outcome has been the fact that the global goal on adaptation could not be concluded. The discussions were left somewhere in the middle, and everybody was applying Rule 16 of the Rules of Procedure. And if you hear of the Rule 16, it means that whatever has not been completed at this session will be taken up at the next session. So we are hoping that at the next session of the subsidiary bodies in June, the global goal on adaptation discussion will continue. Another issue that is of interest to Africa, in which we actually have been pressing and pushing for the past, how many years? From 2015 to now, about 8 years, is the special needs and circumstances of Africa. The Ministers of Environment introduced this item at the adoption of the Paris Agreement in Paris in 2015. Unfortunately, it could not get on the agenda, so the COP president passed it on to the president of the next COP. And it's actually been passed on and on and on, and nothing has happened so far. At this conference, the president again said he was going to hold consultations, and what we've heard is that they have decided that nothing has come out of it, and so they are also going to shelve it. But it's because other regions are also saying that, look, Africa has special needs and circumstances, but we also have special needs and circumstances. So let us do it all together. And this has been the stumbling block so far for us as far as that is concerned. With regard to finance, doubling of adaptation finance and the subject of finance generally, what we know and what we are hearing at this conference is that the 100 billion that was proposed or promised by the developed countries way back in 2009 at the Copenhagen COP, as far as we are aware, has not materialized. But until recently, just before this COP, the news we had was that the OECD has put out a report saying that the developed countries have reached that 100 billion a year at this COP. Now, others are very doubtful, and they are asking for proper accounting to ensure that that has been done. And another major issue that is currently being discussed, and you will notice that in the Paris Agreement, the parties agreed that at the COP in 2023, there will be a global stocktake. What they meant was that in 2023, the parties will assess how far they have gone with the implementation of the Paris Agreement. Are we on track? And this is currently being discussed by the presidency. AGN has made presentations to that effect, but the discussions are ongoing. And we hope that there will be a good outcome at this conference. So, James, off the cuff on my head, this is what I can say about what is happening, and we are hoping for the best. The AGN, I must say, is so properly organized. We've got people who are pushing our issues, and we expect a very good outcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof, for that statement. I think we have a few moments for interaction, possibly interaction with our colleague from PACJA, since we cannot really speak on behalf of the African Group of Negotiators, but also interaction among ourselves. So ladies and gentlemen, any comments, questions, issues? Would you like to come here? I don't see a mic, so maybe we have to use this one. I think mine will be very good.
Yes, thank you. My name is Stephen Mushiri, representing the Pan-African Farmers Organization. I think for us, more or less, everything has been said by our colleague Mithika, and I think we appreciate the progress that is actually happening so far with the discussions. I think we've been able to view the draft that has been shared of the GGA. We are still studying it. Of course, some quick observations are that we as farmers who are so crucial in this discussion around adaptation are conspicuously missing in a lot of these documents. You know, there's no explicit mention about the engagement with farmers and other vulnerable groups. I think it's a concern that our constituency is actually raising. I know that for us, this COP was going to be very important, especially discussions on adaptation. And we are saddened that there isn't much happening, you know, around this. Of course, it's been a challenge for us to access resources. And like has been mentioned by other parties, you know, we've been looking at ways through which the complexity of this process can be reduced or managed so that institutions like ours can be able to have the ability to actually be able to access a lot of these resources. I think also important to mention is that is the issue of food and food security, nutrition security, especially in Africa. I know we're talking a lot about droughts and floods and calamities and everything, but at the end of the day, our continent is importing heavily every year. And I think these are discussions that need to come on the table. I know agriculture has taken a bit of time to be on the table, but I think these are the issues that we hope that conversations going forward are going to start being captured so that they actually put position Africa better as these discussions go forward. We are looking forward to the discussions in June. Like has actually been said, a lot of things are pending. Of course, there are a lot of interests, and we appreciate the interest. And we hope that your support in this process will also help us, put the farmers properly in as far as these discussions are concerned. Otherwise, thank you very much for this opportunity.
Yeah, so that is very significant. The farmers are, as you heard, the biggest constituency, both in terms of numbers, but also in terms of contribution to African economies. Now, we also have a statement from the Parliamentary Committee of Tanzania, of Africa. Or maybe you can give a more correct introduction. Sorry.
Hello, everyone. My name is Neema Lugangira. I'm a member of Parliament from Tanzania, but I'm also a member of the steering committee of the African Food Systems Parliamentary Network. And my appeal to all of you in the room and those who are not in the room, but particularly our African negotiators, is that in the GST text, the word food systems is totally missing. Therefore, as members of Parliament, but also as members of Parliament who are championing strengthening food systems in Africa, we appeal to all of you to make sure that our voice is heard so that in the final declaration document, there should be food systems. Because food is central, and we cannot achieve anything or everything that is being discussed throughout this COP if we will have the final GST declaration with no food system. So on behalf of the people that we represent across the continent, we appeal to you, our African negotiators, to make sure in the final declaration, the word food systems will appear and be of significance. Thank you.
Yes, so I think we have two other requests for the floor, and we have just about 10 minutes to conclude this session. So, yes, sir, and then the lady behind you. Please introduce yourself, and apologies, I don't.
Thank you so much. I'm Brahma Kone. I'm the regional advisor for climate change and health at the WHO regional office in Africa, in Brazzaville. And I'm quite happy to take the floor after this lady, because Africa has been fighting so far for agriculture, food system, water, and the ending point of all those things we are doing are from our health and well-being. If we are discussing with other regions, with other countries, if we want to come with specific point related to Africa, let us don't say we want to come with specific point for Africa. Let us say we want to come with point related to health and well-being. Why? When we will be talking about health and well-being, definitely we will realize Africa is the less healthy region of the world. When it comes to water, sanitation, and AGN indicators, when you look at this SDGs, Africa is the one coming in the last position. So let's enter with thematic issues that systematically will put Africa at the center of debate and not with regional orientations from which any region will still say, I'm also concerned. And health and well-being is definitely one of the points that will call us all come together and talk about African issues. And it will let us talk about agriculture, food system and nutrition. It will let us talk about water system. And at the end, water pollution and health. It will let us talk about air pollution. And when it comes to air pollution, again, Africa. Because all the cars that are not used in developing regions are coming in Africa. So let's enter through thematic issue. Because we know those thematic issues will definitely position Africa in the middle. And from there, we will make it happen. So we are calling for an African common position on health and well-being because we trust from WHO that this is for us the real bottleneck to enter and to call everyone sit around Africa and move forward on our agenda. So this is the call we wanted to make here, and we hope by next COP we will get thematic session related to health and well-being, because those thematic sessions will call to other sectors that we are not seeing systematically the connection, which are agriculture, which are water system, food system, and everything around. So let us keep together for health and well-being for Africa. Thank you.
Yes, your turn, please. So yes, this is the first COP that health is actually a theme of the negotiations, a very important theme as well.
Hello, everyone. My name is Julie Colette. I work with Plan International in West and Central Africa. We've so far observed some great language in the draft GGA text, specifically paragraph 12, which encourages parties to take into account a gender-responsive, participatory, and fully transparent approaches, as well as a human rights approach, while ensuring intergenerational equity, social justice, and also vulnerable groups, children and young people. So we really want to applaud this gender-responsive and human rights approach that has been taken into consideration. And we wish to encourage our African group of negotiators to engage a similar text when it comes to climate financing. Specifically, we want to recommend that we should have increasing climate finance that is gender responsive, accessible to young people, and especially girls and women who are the most disproportionately affected by the impact of climate change, and also to embed children's rights in loss and damage finance governance and decision-making processes. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we take note of the proposals to include issues of gender, food systems, and health in the outcome statement. As I said, there hasn't been much movement yet in the conclusion of the cover decision, but hopefully by the end of the COP there will be some significant movement. So ladies and gentlemen, allow me to thank Mitika Mwenda, Professor Osafo, and the AGN for the statement. And if there's any significant development between now and the final day, we will try and convene an additional briefing session. So thank you very much for making the time to attend this one. And we'll see you soon.